Got it.
We're live now. Live now.
Got it. There we go. I'm back. Yep.
Morena. Koto.
Hi, everybody.
Sure, Shane.
Morning, everybody.
Is recording in progress.
Morning, Sophie.
Cool, cool.
Yeah, we are live at the moment.
Can everyone just be aware that I may have to switch off my video to get some reception?
Mm-hmm.
I hope you can all hear me and see me now.
Yeah. Yeah, both hear and see, Deborah. Yeah. Are you on your phone or on your computer?
I'm on my phone.
Yeah, okay.
It's more reliable.
Okay, it's 9:30. Are we all good to commence, I think? Morena, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to all Audit and Risk Committee members, and also extended welcome to full council members that are here also. I'll start with a karakia. Whakataka te ho ke te uru, whakataka te ho ke te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, E he ake ane te takura, he te o, he huka, he hohu, te he Māori ora. Apologies, that wasn't quite as good as my 7-year-old and 10-year-old that in lockdown managed to do that for me last hui. Might have to take turns on that in future huis. So yes, welcome. I don't believe we've got any apologies today. I haven't heard of any, so have a mover.
I've received none, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So someone to move the apologies. Thanks, Murray, and to second. Thanks, Deborah. All in favour? Wave of hand. Thank you. Identification of any extraordinary business. I don't believe there is any.
No, Madam Chair, nothing has come across my desk ahead of this meeting.
Thank you. Can I have someone to move the identification of any extraordinary business? Thanks, Shane, and seconder. Thank you, Deborah. All in favour? Thank you. Conflicts of interest. Do we have any conflicts of interest to be declared?
Again, nothing has been sent across my desk, Madam Chair.
Have someone move that, please? Thank you, Bob, and someone to second. Thank you, Deborah. All in favour? Great, thank you. That moves us on to confirmation of last hui's minutes. I'm pleased to have those as all taken as read and someone to confirm that they are a complete and accurate view of the last hui. Thank you, Sam, and someone to second. Might have to raise your hand again as I flip between. There we go, Shane. Thank you. And all in favour? Great. Leads us on to matters under investigation. We have the draft sensitive expenditure policy, not yet due until the 3rd of November, and our major projects in the PIR. Is there any commentary from that, David, or we'll just take those two items as work in progress?
Madam Chair, if we just take those as work in progress, the PIR one will be discussed during the projects report later this morning's meeting. Great,
thank you. Have someone to move matters under investigation, please. Thank you, Deborah. I think I saw your hand. And someone, Murray, thank you. And seconder? Bob, thank you. That leads me on to my chair's verbal update report. So during the week, I attended via Zoom. OAG had put an invite out to all chairs and deputy chairs of Audit and Risk Committee, local government. It was a 1-hour session. It was very informative and useful, and they had their keynote speaker as a gentleman by the name of John Nichols, who is very well known in the governance world, both in the commercial corporate sector and also public sector. And I guess relevance for this committee is that he is the independent chair of the Hastings Audit and Risk Committee. I took away, and also to note, Nicole also attended that call, which was great. So I took away 5 or 6 key things that won't take long, but I think they were good for us to note as our continuous, I guess, journey of improvement. And everything he said sort of made good sense. So I thought actually they were quite worthwhile to kind of note them down. So he is the independent chair. He has 1 other member, independent member, and then they have 5 elected councillors within the Audit and Risk Committee. He's a very strong strong advocate for independence on Audit and Risk Committee, but quite interesting, which I hadn't actually thought about too much, was not only the skill set, which I guess is, we all consider that, but his very strong advocacy for the role is around political neutralness, I guess. So he said, he's able to support government being able to support management and be very unbiased and completely objective, because he holds no sort of political view. So I thought, yeah, that was very interesting. Also to note, they have a risk team of 2 FTEs that concentrate. He calls them their tier 1 risks, which I guess are their strategic level risks. And those 2 FTEs report into the role which is called GM Corporate Services. So they have a full-time kind of risk management team, I guess, looking after what he says his top 10, top 15 strategic level risks. They also have an outsourced internal audit program, which is completed by, I guess, a local CA practice, delivering assurance over those top 10 strategic risks. They also have a defined risk appetite. They understand what their risk appetite is and their tolerance. He comes from a very strong infrastructure background, so quite rightly he has done a lot of work in the asset management space, but sees this as a very key risk for local government, and obviously has required and requested independent assurance over those areas. And the last thing I thought he also mentioned, which I thought was quite good in our use of diligent, but said that with regards to the quality of reporting and moving in that journey of continuous reporting, when he first came into governance in local government, he was surprised at the non-use of appendices. So he's been working with management to kind of use appendices much more, and to make sure that the quantity of information is at the right level for governance, which I think we've made great progress just in the last 12 months. You know, I think when I had my first meeting of several hundred, pages, I think we're kind of moving on that journey, but it just a prompt that to use the diligent library going forward for anything that we think is appropriate. So, yeah, I thought quite a good use of 60 minutes of just his view on what he thinks good looks like, and nothing jumped out at me as going, we haven't got that, or we're not moving towards that. So, yeah, it was a really useful session. I think Nicole got some good useful information out of it also. So that's the end of my oral update report. If I could have someone move that, please. Thank you, Sam. And a second. Thank you, Deborah. And all those in favour? Great, thank you. Right, that leads us on to... Oh, actually, sorry, I need to, using the correct term, I guess, withhold the standing order of allowing and welcoming all council members to now partake in the next paper, the next item, which is obviously the letter back to the Crown on 3 Waters. So, I welcome you to partake in this conversation for this item. Sorry, Nicole,
Your microphone's not on, Nicole.
Yeah. Nicole, are you?
Nicole, do you want to use the chat function and drop your question through there?
That we may have temporarily lost Nicole, so maybe we will.
And Elisa, I wonder if we ask David just to give an overview of the work done and what's been circulated. As there's some things were in the minutes and some things were circulated separately, and then we could come back to the questions and comments that councillors might have.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to do that and acknowledge standing orders have been suspended for this item, albeit for this item only. And just by way of the backstory, we recall that at its meeting of the 22nd of September, Council delegated authority to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee to hold this discussion today. And the reason it did that is because we had only just started our public consultation, public information program. Attached to the agenda is a report which has been prepared incorporating all of those key issues raised firstly by the Three Waters Working Party, and secondly by councillors, either to myself and around General Council meeting discussion, but more importantly in discussions that we had both with Local Government New Zealand and with DIA. At the opening, we acknowledge that Council's publicly stated position on Three Waters is that we will not agree to transfer any water, wastewater or stormwater assets to any proposed new entity without undertaking full engagement and feedback with our community. We are currently seeking more information, and that was the purpose of those discussions with the external parties on outstanding issues that are important to us. And we need that information before we go out and consult with our community before the end of the year on those issues. And along with other members of Zone 5 and 6, which are all of the South Island councils, we have called for a pause in the government's reform process to enable those important outstanding issues to be addressed in order that we can have a meaningful conversation. And until we receive a definitive response to these, it will not be possible for us to communicate with our communities. Council has taken an approach based around informing our community of what's being proposed, and we bear in mind again that these are central government's reforms, they are not Council's reforms, but we're very interested to know what the impact of that reform will mean for Selwyn and identifying some of the matters that are still seeking clarification. What I can tell you is that since our public engagement program has been underway, as of 5 o'clock last night, we had received 2,522 views on our Three Waters webpage. 777 people had clicked through the video that is attached to that. And at that time, we had received 143 comments to our video post. And I know that some of you have additionally received comments as well. A good 90+% of people are in support of the council position at this stage. There's real concern about the impact of reforms across our rural sector, both in the loss of local knowledge, but also control on how those services are provided. Currently, ratepayers in Selwyn pay an average annual rate contribution of $1,190 for the Three Waters services. Under the proposal from central government, that will increase to $3,480 in 2051 without reform, or $1,640 with reform. But the one thing that we constantly have been saying is don't get too absorbed in the numbers, because it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to make any accurate projection on what financial impact will be 30 years in advance. For a number of years, Selwyn has been a very high growth district, enhanced in no small way by the ability of developers to engage directly in a single point of contact with council in respect to infrastructure for their proposed developments. And it's uncertain from the proposed model how that continued advantage will be afforded to developers, and therefore the impact that may potentially have on sustained growth across our district. There are projections through the WICS model that through balance sheet separation and removal of debt, our sector will have greater ability to borrow at potentially cheaper rates. We contend that this is subjective on at least two counts. The first one is that any proposal by a local authority to borrow funds has to go through the consultation process in either the annual plan or the long-term plan. And secondly, it fails to recognise the credit rating of a strong performing council such as Selwyn, which now for the third year in a row have maintained a AA+ independent Fitch rating. The proposed model in terms of governance, we believe, is extremely resource hungry and will potentially add to significant extensions of time and decision making. In recent days, there has been a release from the Stormwater Working Party of a report. My personal view is that that is far too late to add value to the conversation, and certainly the complexities attached with stormwater certainly underpin our request for additional time to be taken to fully understand those, the magnitude of it, the complexity would suggest that an initial transformation of the sector would be best served by the two waters approach only. In the letter to the Minister, and I just need to pause at this stage, Madam Chair, there is a report on the Council agenda starting on page 17. Subsequent to that, I circulated to members of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee a draft letter to the Minister of Local Government. That letter ostensibly is a complete download, albeit in a slightly different order from the report and the agenda. Very little new information at this stage, albeit we will be having a discussion around that at the moment, other than to incorporate initial comments that we have received back through the community information program. Some of the matters, there are, should I say, a significant number of matters that we've identified for further consideration. Amongst those are we need a more detailed understanding of the assumptions that underpin what projections may be further down the track. Importantly, we need to understand the time frame and the process for the transition of assets. And a key thing, for example, if we are transferring water or wastewater assets, are we just transferring the asset, or are we also transferring the land underneath those assets, in which case that will require a legal input in terms of lease of that. The impact on local authorities' ability to deliver three water services through the transition period is becoming increasingly important for local authorities, given the strong pressure that there are already on three waters resources. A lot of concern about the local voice and how it will be given effect in decision making to ensure that the current communication lines enjoyed by most community members are still available. And we talk about alternative models. When we commenced discussion along three waters, there were a number of models that were considered, both in terms of local clusters or district or regional wide. It would be prudent, in my opinion, to at least pause to go back and see how the central government projections align with those, and where the advantage would be, not so much the financially, but in terms of access to service delivery, the quality and the timeliness of that delivery as well. My final comment, Madam Chair, is just in reference to a set of recommendations that I have forwarded for consideration, and for the benefit of the public, I will read those recommendations. The first is that the Audit and Risks Subcommittee acknowledges its delegation from Council to finalise response to central government on its three waters proposals. B, to receive the report. C, to request the attached letter be sent to the Minister identifying the key concerns. And again, I just pause to say that those are the concerns contained in the report that is attached to the agenda. And then the next three are of significance. The first one is requesting government pause the proposed Three Waters Reform Programme to address those issues raised in our letter. And I'd have to say that most other councils are raising very similar or same issues that require information that we in our community can better understand the implications of the review. Confirm our decision to stay in or opt out would only be made, and underline the word, would only be made after public consultation in line with our significance and engagement policy. And finally, reaffirming my opening comment that we will not agree to transfer any water or wastewater or stormwater assets without undertaking that full engagement. So others may wish to add to that, and I'd invite the Mayor just to speak to that report as Chair of Canterbury Councils, and also Zone 5 has been leading discussions with the Minister, the most recent one being on Monday afternoon, and maybe also to talk to those recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, David. And before we commence comments and questions, just want to remind Audit and Risk Committee members and extended council members that the purpose of this agenda item is to confirm the completeness and accuracy of this letter. So is the content within this letter accurate, and I'll be comfortable with it as it is presented. So Murray, I think your hand up.
Yeah, I might
the first comment.
defer to Sam, David's suggestion first, and Lisa.
Oh, yes, sorry. Apologies.
Yeah.
Thanks, Murray. I just confirm the conversations that David has mentioned. 2 days ago now, Canterbury Mayor's met with Minister Mahuta to sort of give her a bit of feedback around why we had asked for the pause and the reflections, I suppose, that our community had given us. It'd be fair to say that everyone is feeling and hearing and very similar things. Some councils have made much firmer statements around already deciding to be out without sort of saying, they've said that without saying that. They say it in one sentence, and the next sentence they say, oh, but we'll make a decision in the future. I think we're in a more open space than that. And there's something about remaining to be convinced that this model is actually going to get us where the government wants us to go to. But I think the letter itself really conveys the feedback that we're receiving from our community and the process that we are committed to, should it be left to us to make the decision. There's a couple of things that I think the letter needs to have, and just some slight changes. Firstly, it talks about Zone 5 and 6 confirming, and it actually needs to be Canterbury Mayoral Forum. Not all of Zone 5 and 6 has called for a pause, and there are some councils that would like to see this happen now, so if that could be changed. I think it would be helpful to add some context of the Selwyn water story over the last 10 years, and it only needs to be a couple of paragraphs, but just to talk about our 10-year journey, district-wide rating, adding in water meters, and that those changes, I suppose, that we've done ahead of time, ahead of this, to be proactive about our water resource, and also the funding of the Pines wastewater treatment plant and dealing with our own waste inside our own boundaries, and the links that we're making to dispose to land. All those sorts of things that actually the reform is trying to address, many we have already addressed. And lastly, in the meeting we had with DIA that all councillors were a part of a couple of weeks ago now, they asked about the Darfield case study, and we said to them we would send them an update of that story. That includes the spending of tranche 1 funding, and again, a paragraph or two on that, David, I think would add to the letter. There's nothing contentious, well, I don't see anything contentious in those as far as needing for us all to re-see what you're going to write there, but just those two stories I think would add value in context to the comments that we make in there. So, Annalisa, thank you for allowing this discussion to happen in this meeting. It's due to timing constraints and the Minister wanting feedback this week, and Council not having a meeting here. And as you say, this discussion isn't about the opting in or opting out or any other feedback. And I've received about 4 other emails today from people in Selwyn, and it's over 100 over the last 24 hours. I don't know how helpful those emails are, to be fair. I don't know how other councils feel about having copy and pasted emails. It doesn't certainly warm my heart towards the feelings that are contained, but we're not here to make those decisions. We're here to think about this letter and feedback. So thanks for highlighting that for us, Annalisa. And yeah, those are the comments from me. Ta.
Right, thanks, Sam. Now back to you, Murray.
Yeah, thanks, Annalisa. Look, it's really just a process question for a start. We've got, and David's articulated, and yourself, suspension of standing orders. And I'm just clarification, and I absolutely support all members of council being able to speak at this meeting. It's absolutely crucial that we get those views. It's just really a question around whether terms of reference, of course, say that, and I think it's contained in the recommendations, just want clarification, that it is audit and risk that will vote ultimately on the outcome of this, not a full. If we're doing that, I just want to be sure that we're not challenged on that. Again, I don't actually have a problem with all councillors voting on it, but we just have to make sure we've got the process right. So perhaps some clarification. Yeah, if we scroll down, what is it? It might be, is it?
If I can help, Murray, suspension of standing orders are that it is the audit and everybody can speak, but only audit and risk members can vote.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. That's the way I read it. I just wanted to be clear that we're not going to be challenged on this. It's quite clear. Just the final passing comment. Obviously, we've had a working group, and I'd really value hearing from the 3 members of that working group, perhaps in line with the comments from, summation from yourself, David, and Sam. It would be really good to hear from that working group, but I'm sure they will all speak. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Murray. Deborah.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, when you talk about in the correspondence about who actually owns the land under the asset, in the rural community, we may have pipes that actually pass through private property, and they may not necessarily have an easement on them. Have we done any work around that, and has that information been put forward to the government? Because if this asset is going to be transferred from the community to central government, all of those legalities of legal easements need to really be understood and tidied up as well. And that's going to further add to the cost with regards to purchase of those easements. And I'm just wondering, from the rural community perspective, has that issue been addressed or even considered by DIA?
So through you, Madam Chair, Deborah, that's the very reason that I've raised that as an outstanding issue in terms of the complexity of that transfer. And you might recall in one of our earlier discussions, one of our staff talked about what exactly it is that we are transferring and the detail of that asset that's being transferred. So in terms of land ownership, that will be complex at the very least, and there will be it will be, I think, subject to legal agreement between the parties. So we have raised it, and again, that's one of the reasons that we're asking for a pause until we can get clarity.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, David.
Sorry, just one more other issue. I circulated some information that was given to me around the aspect of possible privatisation of these schemes with regards to the 75% and agreements to go further out to consultation. Do we actually need to question that part of the proposed legislation on how they're going to manage our three waters not going into private hands in the future?
I can touch on that, Deborah. The work that's been done so far with Ngāi Tahu has tried to reinforce how we might be able to keep it away from privatisation. But also the discussion was, should a future community want to open up that opportunity, why should 2 generations previous have locked that away? So the ability for 75% of the governance group to need to pass it, and then for it to go to, in this case, almost all of the South Island, to have to vote more than 75% to privatise as a pretty high bar. I mean, I doubt we'd ever get there, but should that be the case, I don't think we want to be in a position where we've locked this up so that, if our great-grandparents had done that to us and there was a better option today, I think we need to be careful that we don't make it a bar that could never be climbed. But just got to make it as hard as we can to undo, so that the future generation is very certain they want to undo it. And the other problem is that a government could change that legislation at any time if a new government came in. And we've seen governments in the past make different decisions and privatise assets in the last 10 years. So things do change over time.
Madam Chair, in the absence of other comments, what I'm hearing is support for the letter with the suggested changes from the Mayor that he has put forward, and undertake to, we'll hear from Shane and Sophie, and then undertake to forward this letter to the Minister no later than end of work on Friday afternoon of this week.
Yes, we'll just hear from Shane first.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, kia ora koutou. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much, Madam Chair, Your Worship, Sam, CEO, David, and everyone that's here today, especially those that may be watching the public live stream. I feel compelled to weigh it at this stage. Obviously, myself, Councillor Miller, Councillor McInnes make up the Three Waters Working Group, and as asked by Murray Lemon, he would like to hear from us, and I think that's only very fair. David, I support your letter, and I think in the outset of that letter where you state Council's publicly stated position on the Three Waters proposals is that it will not agree to transfer any water wastewater or stormwater assets to any proposed new entity without undertaking full engagement and feedback processes from the Selwyn community. I've heard loud and clear from the Selwyn community over the last couple of days, and as I've said months before, and I don't think it's going to take public consultation to actually find out what their view is at this stage. And we've received hundreds of emails, not only last night, and comments to the effect of, and I'll put it in terms for one of our Southbridge ratepayers, year to the wastewater, the Three Waters reform. I just want to be clear that the Selwyn District Council faces the single largest decision of our time, in fact, anyone's time. And as an elected member and spokesperson for my community, I'm compelled to weigh in. As an elected member and a guardian of our assets and our community, I'm hearing loud and clear, and I want to acknowledge everyone that's taken the time to email us. I respect that, and that's what we're here for, to listen and to govern, and that's what we're trained to do. We're also trained to keep an open mind. And while I agree with the intent of the bill to provide, and I think everyone here is the same, intent of the bill to provide safe drinking water to all New Zealanders across Aotearoa, New Zealand, there are still too many concerns, unanswered questions, and lack of information to believe opting in at this stage is in our district's best interest. Your letter covers that, David. I think we have to be very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We've faced increased escalation costs year on year, supply chain demands, and we know costs will increase through Taumata Arawai, the regulation authority. So that's a guaranteed. Prices are going to continue to go up. So we need to be open-minded, but careful in our decisions and guided by our communities. Canterbury is one of the most highly regulated environmental regions, and we are well versed in regulative constraints, costs, and practices. We adapt, fix, accept, and continue to pay. All ratepayers can continue to do that. Murray, our deliberations, the working group deliberations, obviously this is a culmination of that. My fellow councillors will have more to put into that. I don't see within the recommendations, David, the question that was asked last week around an independent report, constant report to provide integrity within our numbers, to have a third party report done. I know that work is in process. What makes me really nervous is that the timelines, and although we can say we're asking for a pause in a consultation process, it's clearly indicative by the reports this morning from our minister that publicly she's not suggesting any pause whatsoever. So we need to be planning 30 years ahead if this does go ahead. There's just so much information that we're not receiving at the moment. It's very hard to make clear governance decisions based on evidence and testimony. We have long-term deliberation plans, and that takes weeks and weeks and hours and hours of work. We haven't been afforded that through the government. And these are the things that makes me really nervous. I've got loads and loads of more to add here, but I know it's not a testimony. It's just about giving assurance to our community through our staff and through this committee that we are committed to protecting the integrity and the welfare of our community, specifically Selwyn. So you have my word on that. Thank you.
Ka pai, Shane. Thank you. Sophie. I think you're on mute. Mute, Sophie.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for letting us take part in this meeting. So yeah, I was on the working group for this with Councillor Epperhart and Councillor Miller. I guess my feeling through this whole process is that there are questions, more questions. You get a few answers, then you ask them more questions, and the questions always race far ahead in number than the answers that you receive. Not least, for instance, as David mentioned earlier, the stormwater report came out last week, which is pretty much ridiculous. That's not enough time for anybody to consider it, not fully. But what we do need to acknowledge is that no change is not an option. Taumata Arawai is coming in. The Ministry of Health has been quite lax, really, in their responsibilities as far as drinking water standards go, and we know this from what's happened in Havelock North and even in Darfield a few years ago. So it's, you know, there is change coming, and what my hope is that central government will seriously consider all of the feedback that they receive from councils, and I suspect there'll be a lot of very common themes are contained within that feedback. One size fits all solution will not fit everybody. What we have at the moment, if we look at it from a well-being's perspective, is probably quite heavy on the economic and possibly even the cultural. But are we sure that it's going to cover social and environmental and future generations? We don't know yet. It's really hard to forecast that far with the lack of information that we've got and the lack of time in which to consider it all. So I'm more than happy if you guys vote to send this letter in. There's been some extra suggestions of things to go in there. That's, you know, it makes sense. We're not saying outright no, but we're making it clear that there's not enough information for us. If they asked us for a yes today, I don't think anybody would vote for this. There's just not enough information. And yeah, and my last thought simply is that, yes, it is good to think about this. We have to think about this in a district-wide perspective. However, New Zealand as a whole has an extremely mobile population. Even in Selwyn, I think pretty much the vast majority of our population has moved here within the last 10 to 20 years. That also means that a lot of people move out. They come from different places. You expect in your life to be able to live in different places and receive good quality drinking water, excellent sewerage, and everything else. So if there is a solution that will help New Zealand as a whole raise its game, then, you know, that's great, but it has to work well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. Grant, I think you're next.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Sophie and Shane. They were very good comments. I think when we formed the working party, the initial task was to move beyond the emotive and actually start looking at what was in front of us and our ratepayers, and particularly start to move away from self-interest and trying to look and see what's in this program which may be in the best interest of the Selwyn community. And I think we clearly identified what we want and what is the why, I suppose, was the first question. Why is the government doing this? And initially they're driving it out of substandard infrastructure and some environmental concerns, plus some health outbreaks. And when we look at our infrastructure in Selwyn, we haven't been immune to those problems. And I think if we look at Springston and the E. coli outbreaks and those kind of things we haven't had in the past, they'll certainly give us a kick. And I think in our past audit and risk meetings, we've addressed at length our infrastructure. And to be fair, I think we've pulled our socks up quite a substantial amount, and we've got a pretty strong infrastructure base now. But what do our ratepayers want? They want high quality, environmentally sustainable, affordable services. Largely, I believe we're providing those. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't look to the future and see, can we increase efficiency and make our water services more affordable? So there's a wider picture at play, but as Shane and Sophie has both eloquently described, is the dearth of complex, data-driven, accurate information for us to make a decision on, which will give certainty whichever way we go. Because if we are to embrace the government reforms, our ratepayers would want some certainty that they would be better off both in the immediate and long-term future. Currently, you cannot make that decision on the information provided. It's very generic, very broad, big picture, which is basically saying almost to the effect of, well, trust us, we'll get it right. And there needs to be a clearer feature, even in the charging mechanism, which is critical to understanding the cost for our ratepayers. There's no descriptor in how they might manage that. So looking about what the assets in particular and the ownership, I think our asset values are understated, particularly around the value of our consents. The consents we've got alone would be unachievable in some respects to get now, particularly on waste disposal and water reticulation. So our valuations are probably incorrect. The ownership structure is very weak. To say we all own it together, but there's no shares. there's no ability to understand in 30 years' time if the business becomes very successful and has a surplus, how is that returned? One of the things that I'm concerned about too is if the entities get a large swag of assets and do rationalisation, and I think it should be included in the letter, that the Selwyn District Council has first right of refusal or first return of any assets which are disposed of, because the likelihood is that there will be efficiencies gained if this goes ahead and there will be disposal of assets. I think I raise a concern. I understand where David's coming from about the 2 waters versus 3. The challenge with just going back to 2 waters, David, I think is that in general, we operate as an integrated system. And if we are to take 2 parts of that system out, the remainder being left with the council will inevitably result in a higher cost structure for our existing ratepayers to cover. So while I hear what you're saying, it's probably, if it is to stay with local government, there would need to be some financial recognition of the increased expenses to run that 3rd water, the stormwater portion, while the other 2 are moved on. Government predicts that long-term costs will be lower for ratepayers, but there's not really a lot of evidence in the pricing model what that will look like. And when you're delivering the lowest cost per 200 cubic metres of water in New Zealand, it seems highly unlikely that that price will go down. You're more likely to be on day one a wee bit of a price shock for our ratepayers. I agree with Sophie about Te Mata ROI and to that matter, reform of local government. The government seems to have got the order wrong in this. If you want to progress reform, which I'm not saying we're against reform, because there are aspects which could be beneficial to our ratepayers, but it would seem more intelligent to actually do local government reform first and allow Te Mata ROI to actually regulate the industry. And very quickly we would understand where the people are or where the communities are that need help. So I think I would like that included in the letter, David, that, the prioritisation of making sure that, well, our view is that it could be done a better way. I think it's important, as Sam said at the start, that we remain non-emotive about this, because it is easy to get emotive and feel that your assets are getting stolen. But our challenge as council is just to work in the best interests of our ratepayers and understand what's in the best interest of our ratepayers. I am concerned a wee bit about us taking a non-position, I suppose, and being accused of, well, not accused, I suppose, but being lumped into a group of potentially compliant councils where other councils have made positions. I understand the reason we've done that, and I support it, but I am concerned that not having a stated position at this point might be detrimental to us. And I'd hope to be pleasantly surprised to the contrary, but I am concerned about that. I don't want to dominate, so I'll pass the conversation over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant, and some useful comments. Before I pass back to Councillor Lemon, I would like the opportunity for all attendees to contribute, ask questions, and ask for any additions within the letter, but just mindful of time and the other very pressing matters on my Audit and Risk Committee agenda. So if we can maybe further comments, if we can try and stick to the content within the letter, and if there are any inaccuracies in the letter, or like Sam's very good summary at the beginning, whether there's any areas that you think need to be extended, that would be great. I'll pass you over to Murray. I think you've got another comment.
Yeah. Thank you, Annalisa. Look, I won't use up too much oxygen. I was grateful to have the comments from the 3 councillors on the working group, and it has nicely summated where I think all of us have got to, with slight differences. Yes, David, we shouldn't fixate on the numbers, but ultimately that will form part of our decision making. And I note on page 25 that you've a note there that says it may be prudent during the pause period, a request period, to review these models, aligning them firstly against which, secondly against current council projections. And I think that is important, and Councillor Miller has stated that there's an opportunity for us to do that, and I think we must and we should ensure that not only are the projections from DIA correct, but also that ours are, so we can make an informed decision. I think the additions that have been suggested by the working group are pragmatic. And I also, David, congratulate you on the work that's been put in to get this report to this stage, because I think it does largely summate the discussions, the considerable discussions we've had to this stage, and the unease which I suspect all of us feel about the rapidity of this, and as Councillor Miller has said, the order in which it's been done. We've got a regulator, and that regulator, whether we opt in or out, we will have to meet the obligations of that legislation and that regulator. So it's not just a governance issue, it will ultimately be what is the cost of us meeting that, and are we currently in a position to do that with the way we're operating, or is the new model that's been suggested a better option? So we keep an open mind, cognizant of course of the comments that have already been made, that at this stage I wouldn't personally opt in because I don't have the information to support that. So thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you, Murray. I agree with your sentiments, and Nicole Grant has nailed it as well. I think none of us at this stage would opt in with the lack of information we've got, but I do reflect on your comment, Murray, that we have to have an open mind, and we don't know what's coming at us after the end of this month from the Minister with what she's received. Having seen the webinar on Tassie Water yesterday, I'm quite convinced that I'm not interested in anything going into any organisation unless our asset value is recognised in a shareholding, and I think that's what the people of Selwyn could have as a minimum. So yeah, happy to see the letter go ahead as it is. Thank you, David, for your hard work, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Cheers.
Thank you, Malcolm. Mark.
Thank you. I too would agree with the sentiments of the previous speakers. I support the letter going to the Minister as is proposed with the Mayor's amendments. We don't have enough information to date to make a decision. My bottom line has always been how does this benefit the Selwyn ratepayers? To date, there is no benefit except possibly a feel good that we're helping other councils get their systems to the stage and state that Selwyn's are. So I support the letter, the request for a pause and more information, because I too agree that if council had to decide today, opt out would probably be our decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have any other questions or comments? All right, David, maybe you want to reconfirm what you would like the Audit and Risk Committee to be doing with this letter.
Firstly, just acknowledging the comments that I've received, and also the suggested amendments or additions, should I say, to the letter. Interesting, the reference to Future for Local Government, and that was strongly put to the Minister again on Friday, so we'll just strengthen the letter a wee bit around that. Other than that, Madam Chair, look, I'm comfortable with the conversation, clear in the direction that I'm going to be following on Council's behalf through till Friday afternoon, and just refer back to the 6 recommendations that are in front of the subcommittee for moving and seconding.
Okay, with the amendments that have been discussed and requested, with those amendments being made, can I then please have a mover?
I'll move.
Sorry, I've lost, because I've got the words in front of me.
Bob is moving.
Oh, Bob, thank you. And can I have a seconder? Murray?
Murray.
Yes, thank you. And all those in favour from the Audit and Risk Committee? Thank you.
And Elisa, can I just add in here that the recent meeting with the previous Hororata Water Supply Committee, and Bob, you might like to speak on this. Gavin Inch was the chair of that committee for many years, and he called a meeting last week for the local councillors to hear from that committee around how we felt about water. Governance has been a key contributor to our community in many other areas outside of water, but he's also been a leader in discussion. He's been a passionate carer for the Hororata and wider Selwyn area, and has stood up when required. And it was very sad the day after he'd called that meeting to learn of his death. And it would just be good to acknowledge that with a moment's silence now, and wanted to be able to acknowledge that in a formal way as a council meeting, as a previous chair of his council subcommittee, if that's okay.
And can I just add that Gavin King was a significant contributor to council's subcommittee over a number of years.
Sorry, Gavin King. I said Gavin Inch. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, councillors. Thanks, Annalisa.
Thank you. Right, we would now resume standing orders and return to the remaining of the agenda. For the non-audit and risk committee members, you're most welcome to stay and work through the rest of the agenda, but I'd ask you to turn your videos off if you do want to remain for the rest of the agenda. Thank you. So that will move us on to the manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this will be done in two parts. Kelvin is going to speak to items 1 through 4, and I will speak, Madam Chair, to item number 5, the health and safety report.
Good morning, everyone. I'll quickly run through 4 items here. So, audit update. Really no further progress from where we were after the last meeting in terms of timeframes. I suspect there could be further pressure given the COVID impacts currently, but I have spoken with our audit director and reiterated the points made at the last meeting. Moving to second point, subcommittee work program, that's on page 39 of the agenda. It's looking at the next period for this committee up until the next election. So we'll run through that. I don't intend to walk through the program now, but if there's any comments, please raise those and we'll make amendments to it. Cyber security. If I think about the one thing that keeps me awake at night, it's probably cyber security in my space. It's concerning. I saw an article yesterday again where Kiwibank were having issues with their online banking. So it's an ever-present danger for all businesses and organisations in New Zealand. Where we're currently at with this program is we're getting a review completed by an organisation which is going to look at our practices, procedures, controls. And from that, we will develop, if necessary, a plan to remedy any weaknesses. We've appointed the new CIO, who I intend to bring to this committee in the near future. But we're working on a quarterly dashboard around cybersecurity. I think it's that important that we need to have that. So it'll be a matter that will be presented to this committee on a quarterly basis in a PX session. Of course, it wouldn't be something that we would have in the public, given you don't want to reveal where issues are around security. And just quickly touch upon the finance and performance report. It's really just an intro that this is a new report. So we'll run through that with a little bit more detail today to just really allow you to take questions and ask content and how it works. So that's my section of this report. So David, back to you, unless there's questions.
Thanks, Kelvin. And Madam Chair, I'll just quickly speak to and answer questions if they come through to the health and safety report, starting on page 32, hopefully you're finding increasing value in these reports. And you can see there's a lot going on in the health and safety space. This is the report from our in-house meeting a couple of weeks back. Firstly, we give you an update on the health and safety wellbeing strategy, and it's around re-establishing milestones and performance measures through that. Key projects in that, firstly, the OPSEC update, which is taking place across the organisation, and this is following an independent review that we had undertaken around 12 months ago. Page 34, we give some detail to the CCTV placement and monitoring work that's being undertaken. Health and safety training right across the organisation is picking up quite significantly. Lone, remote and isolated working, we've now issued 22 InReach devices, and the training has been undertaken with those. And similarly with the DNA policy, fully implemented from the 13th of September, and that's had a good rollout. Today we're celebrating Mental Health Awareness Week, wearing these T-shirts. Really proud of the organisation. We sold around 100 of those. I think it was just over 100 of those at $20 each. So really supporting that. So anybody coming into the building today, you're going to see a lot of people, myself included, after this meeting wearing that T-shirt again. And we've also identified a number of upcoming mental health and safety and wellbeing initiatives. So quite a detailed report, but happy to answer any of the detail, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kelvin. David? Shane?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I was the last one to put my hand up, so happy to wait my turn. Or not, whatever.
The governor just said you're the first, so.
Roger, thank you. Thanks very much, David, Kelvin, for your report. Kelvin, just a question for you on point number 2, the subcommittee work program. I don't see committee development in that program. Is that something that should be included within the scope of that work plan?
Maybe I could step in and answer that. The outcome to that, Shane, will come out of the councillor workshop, which is a date that escapes me. Someone will remind me shortly. Last week in November, first week in December, which is around liability training.
Great calendar. Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Yes. Secondly, I am receiving a number of increased amount of emails coming through, and I'm not talking about the ones we're receiving from the locals just lately, but overseas emails, I'm guessing, that have won $10 million in a foreign bank account somewhere. So I wonder if there's any opportunity to look into beefing up the firewalls, or not sure what it's called actually, but yeah, I am receiving, and I'm not too sure whether any other councillors are receiving those types of emails. And thirdly, yeah, well done on the shirts. I'm due to pick my one up tomorrow. So great initiative, and in collaboration with the Ashburton Council. So fantastic, totally support. Good job.
Thanks, Shane. Nicole?
Am I working this time?
Yep.
Yes. Kapai.
Sorry about before. And I second comments about the Mental Health Awareness Week and the shirts. I am actually wearing my shirt as well. So it's a very good initiative for us to be doing. Just unfortunate that we're all sitting in our own homes, but our thoughts are with everyone else. Now, actually, Councillor Alexander has just put up in the chat, I see, the question I was going to ask, which was around where the recording of from the CCTV cameras, where's that actually going to be sitting? I assume that would be with ICT.
We will respond to that in a subsequent report.
Okay, thank you.
That is correct, though. It's held secure with very, very few people having access to it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Deborah?
Thanks. My question is also around the CTV. Given that it came up at the last audit and risk meeting with community requesting policy, when we develop that policy, can we get it out to our community committee so they understand what the policy means with regards to advertising the surveillance cameras and where they're going to be located? I think that's very important to engage our community with regards to that particular policy.
Thanks, Deborah. Murray?
Yeah, thanks. It's really just a question around work program, Madam Chair, and I note we haven't got any in David's comments. We subsequently will probably discuss this. One is site visits, and that'll probably come in the workshop. No doubt we'll work out our priorities. But the others around the visits from Cyclone Orion and Audit New Zealand, and I guess we'll also workshop that. Just clarification on that. Other than that, yeah, looks great work program and well done.
Good. Through you, Madam Chair, good call on the site visit stuff. Murray, the Chair and I talked about that this morning, and that will be added. And also our governance staff, support staff, should I say, will be providing advice of scheduled not site visits, Cyclone and Orion visits. And the reason I'm hesitating is I was trying to think of the date, but Jane Taylor and the new CE from Orion are coming in the next few months.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, just on what Deborah was saying, I was at a meeting last night at Colgate, and Darfield are having all their cameras. They're being installed at the moment. There's 30-odd security cameras, and Colgate are looking at doing it in this area. I just wondered how we're working with them, or whether there's any working with them at all, or whether they're just going ahead and doing these things without us knowing much about it.
And through you, Madam Chair, again, Bob, we will address that in a subsequent report to the committee. In fact, probably to full council.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, David. I don't think there are any other questions. So I've got a couple of comments and maybe a couple of things that can come back to us. The cyber review, congratulate you on moving forward with that, with being a key risk item. Maybe in the next Audit Risk Committee, it would be good to understand the scope of that review, because obviously an independent review of cyber risk can be a lot of things, so it would be great. I know we'll eventually get the report, but just good to understand the scope of what that's looking at. As you said, David, the health and safety report is improving month on month, and great to see the placement conversations, which I think is, I've been used to that, is called safety moment conversations, which I think is the same thing. So anytime anyone's having a meeting and any part of the organisation, you know, you always, almost like starting with a karakia, you actually start with karakia and then you start with a safety moment, which really shifts that health and safety culture when you're living and breathing it. So congratulations on moving forward with that. I'd also be interested, maybe as an action item again for the next meeting, just to be able to see what the system selection requirements have been for the health and safety system. We obviously don't need to be part of that selection process as a governance committee, but it would be good to be able to see what good looks like and what the requirements of that system have been. Great to see the traffic light assessment around those key priority and risk areas. And also, I've got a comment with regards to the CCTV policy. Through another hat that I wear, I'm completing an investigation that involves the review of CCTV footage. So I would just encourage management to get a quick legal review of that policy to make sure that it covers off the Privacy Act and protected disclosures. And whoever owns within management is going to own that policy, that they are trained and they understand what they can and cannot do with that data. Because obviously when things go wrong, they go wrong very, very quickly. So it's good to train our people up front to make sure that, and I would also get that legal review before you go out to community consultation, because protected disclosures and the Privacy Act are very important things to get right. So maybe write the policy, get a view on it, and then decide how wide you can actually share that. that activity. And the annual plan, yes, great. You spoke about the site visits to be added, and I think this will be a good thing. And I think Naomi may have already done it, but for this to sit in our library of Diligent, so that maybe every hui week when we're reviewing our papers, we can actually refer to the annual plan, which just keeps management honest, really, because we can keep looking at that annual plan and going, oh, hold on, we're meant to be getting this, or so yeah, having that in the Diligent library part's just good practice. But other than that, that's all from me. But yeah, great work. So thank you. So if I, Deborah, did you have another?
Just one more. Sorry, Madam Chair. Just one more question, really. It's on page 38. Can someone tell me what bow tie training is, please? I've never heard of it before.
So a bow tie is a technique used for managing and understanding risks. So it looks at one side of the bow tie being what could occur and what are the drivers for that potentially occurring, and the other side of the bow tie is the mitigations that can be put in place to reduce the consequence of that risk having occurred. So it's a way of managing risks to look at the controls to avoid it occurring and the actions that can be taken should it occur. We've presented those previously in our risk management paper.
Thank you.
Thanks, Calvin. Other than that, can I please have someone to move the manager's report, please? Nicole, thank you. And a seconder? Murray, thank you. All in favour? Great. Right, that moves us on to our community pools update report, I believe.
Yeah, kia ora everyone. Thanks very much for the time to present to you guys today. So I think first of all, I'll largely take the report in front of you as read, but I think it's important to reflect back, I guess, on the last 3 or so years of work that's happened. We've come from some very high risk and high level things occurring in some of these sites and managed to work through those. So, you know, things like getting Darfield and Southbridge pool safe accredited, putting out the hydro slide at Southbridge, starting to now comply with all the pool water safety and pool water quality standards that are across New Zealand has been a really important step, and being able to work with committees for that. I guess as we look towards the upcoming season, things are tracking really well in terms of recruitment and training. The lifeguards for the summer season have all been recruited. They're going through first aid training this weekend, lifeguard training the next weekend, and following that assessment. So that's really good. Induction follows in November when staff get onto site and do some more site-specific training when the weather's a bit warmer. So that's looking really promising. I think the two things to probably note out of the report especially are COVID and the impact that might have. COVID, the Delta level 2 restrictions that we have on us at the moment will severely restrict us. And ironically, I'm not too worried about some of the more less patronised pools, such as Sheffield, Clinchy, and Leaston. They're probably a little bit easier to manage because we don't have 50 or 60 people in those sites all at one time. Maintaining 2 metres distancing between swimmers though at Darfield and Southbridge is going to prove very challenging. We've got some plans in place, and we've obviously learnt some things from running SAC at that level for a few weeks now. So we understand what that entails, but it does mean people potentially having to book into lane space and book into leisure swimming. Just on that, we do have some programming running out at Darfield as well, which has already received a good response just through word of mouth. We are looking at going out and advertising this coming week and next week as well in terms of Learn to Swim and some of the aqua programs that we're running as well. So that's gone really well. We're looking at having up to 70 kids in Learn to Swim out there. I'm just testing how that goes. with the ability to potentially expand that out quite quickly, especially in term 1 next year. So yeah, things are looking relatively positive there, but I guess I just want to really communicate that the restrictions that COVID level 2 would place on us over the summer season, it will severely restrict numbers, and something to be really aware of. And happy to take any questions on the report or the upcoming season.
Goodbye, James. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see whose hands went up first. Shane? Oh, it's pointing. Nicole?
Oh, thanks, Jane. So thanks for the report, James. And good you said about the COVID-19. I was actually going to ask about the volunteer man pools, but you've pretty much answered about that. Just the heat pump at Southbridge Pool, just seeing that you didn't know at the time of writing, have you had an update with regards to the timing on that yet?
So what we've got at the moment, we've identified four smaller units that are going to work for that pool with the help of a local engineering firm. We just need to procure the install now. We're not too sure what the cost of that install is going to be. At this point, I wouldn't say I'm 100% certain that it's going to go in on time, but I'm far more confident than I was at the time of writing that report that it will be going in before November. So I can provide further updates as we go through that process. But yeah, unfortunately, when we started looking at the procurement and Auckland being in lockdown, that has whittled down some of the options for us. I don't think they're necessarily better options. There was just far more of those options, initially if we went into lockdown. So yeah, that's the only update I can give at this stage, unfortunately.
No, that's good. Thank you.
You, Shane.
Yes, big virtual kia ora to you, James. Thank you very much for your report, mate. I just had thank you very much, Councillor Reid, for asking the question around the heat pump for Southbridge. I think there might be a data error on page 41, the season, pools to operate in the season 2021. Just that one there, I'm guessing it's 21-22. And just whether we are, I'm guessing that in terms of Leiston and Calinchi, we really do rely on our community volunteer involvement, and whether we continue to, or whether we are actually quantifying the levels of commitment that our volunteer community committees invest in to the pool and running of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Leiston, they've probably got the most involvement because of the length of time the community wants that pool open for. So that requires 3 checks a day essentially. So they've got a volunteer group of around 5 individuals that will go in and do those water checks. Our staff rotate through there as often as possible as well to give them a hand, and certainly give them a hand with any majors. So yeah, they're right in there, and they're doing a reasonable amount of work for us in that space. And Calinchi as well, they're doing 1 check a day during term time, and then at least 2 during the school holiday period as well. And that's mainly around compliance with water quality standards and the water having to be checked every 3 hours. So yeah, it's significant involvement, but we do our very best to support them in things like maintenance and day-to-day operations as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah.
Thanks for the report, James. Just a question around the wristbands. Are they actually, for the junior users over pools, are they actually included in the admission fee, or are they going to be an extra cost for those families, and how are they going to be recycled or reused? Yeah, good question. So they're fully included in the admission price, and we have a drop-off box. So there's a couple of ways we're doing it. So for Learn to Swim, every child gets a band and is advised to keep the band and bring it back. They're non-disposable, those ones. And at Selwyn Aquatic Centre, what we've done is we've got a box on the way in and a box on the way out. So a child without a band can pick up the band on the way into the facility, and then on the way out, they drop it back off into a different box, and that gets sanitised overnight and then redistributed the next day. So that's the way we're rolling with it.
there is a little bit of concern around, I guess, sustainability in that sense. They are rubber bands, and if they get thrown out, then that's just something that's going to happen. So we're looking at other options that might be a little bit more sustainable long term, including biodegradable wristbands that go on. Just there's a bit tricky when you don't obviously don't want them dissolving in the pool and that sort of thing. So at the moment we're just going with the rubber ones, and hopefully people keep them in their sling bag. But yeah, as mentioned in the report, it has had probably it's not really been so much for staff. It's been a nice physical reminder for parents and guardians as they come in to watch their child, rather than staff going, oh, they've got a wristband on, I'll pay more attention. Because, you know, if you see a 3-year-old wandering around the pool by themselves, you're naturally going to pay more attention to that child anyway. So, but ultimately it does seem to be working at this stage.
Thanks, James. Sam.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, James, for the report. I just want to support the programming to drive participation and use of the pools. I think that's really key, and it's been good to see that in a lot of our community centres as well. And the more that we continue to do that as a council, I think that's actually the expectation of our community. There are a lot of community groups that can do some really good things, but there's also the need for council to continue to share some of the things that at the moment only happen in the big centres with some of the other places. So really want to see that in Darfield coming up, and how that might be in Southbridge going forward and through other places too. So you just want to encourage that way of working.
Yeah, certainly. And just on Southbridge, they've got a very active volunteer swim club out there. And so we're just supporting them really with ongoing training and things like that at this stage. I think it might get to a point at some, you know, especially once the heating's in and they've got a bit more consistency and heat in that pool, that Learn to Swim might take off out there a little bit as well, when, you know, kids can last more than 25 minutes in that main pool. So that's certainly something we're looking at. But yeah, really good to get it rolled out. And I suppose that's a credit to the team doing the work on compliance, that we're now not having to focus on compliance with lots of things. We can now start to focus on getting fun things happening.
Great. Thanks, Sam, and thanks, James, again for your paper. There's no other questions. Can I have someone please move James's paper? Shane, is that? I think so. And can I second that? Sam, thank you. And all those in favour? Thank you. Thank you, James.
Yes, sir.
Right, well, that moves us on to our finance report. Kelvin.
Yes, as previously mentioned, this is a redesigned report. So the intent of the redesign is to sort of lift the level of insight and focus on what is really the more key variances. Previous report had things at a level which didn't allow those variances to be seen. The other point is around developing the performance report around KPIs. So we do have a set of KPIs which go into our long-term plan, and creating a little higher level of focus upon those to enable you to see where things are tracking a little bit more regularly. I'll just take a little bit of time at the top of each page to run through the new reporting, and also to talk to the variances. So the first page highlights is just a short a snapshot of current performance, financial and non-financial. There'll be some of these things will be stock standard and will be there every month. Others will move in and out as and when they become a highlight or a low light or something that needs to be focused upon. We briefly discussed the financial position. So income in the month is up on, in the year to date is up by 4.9 against the budget, largely driven by DCs through growth and this subsidies coming from trends, so NZTA regarding flood recovery. Costs on the other side is the other piece of the flood piece, and this is a cost which have incurred in the first 2 months of this year, which were not included in last financial year due to timing, which will go into that recovery piece in the future to an extent. Moving down to CapEx, slower than budget at this stage. Interesting how we put the variance, and I'll discuss this a little bit later on, that being negative, being below budget, but we'll discuss that a little further later. Regulatory matters, so again, we're continuing to see high consenting numbers. There has been a little bit of a trend up in that percentage, but it is still a lot lower than what we'd be comfortable with as an organisation. Public facility stats, showing there the percentage of the annual budget that has been consumed or we've met the target on. So just to give you a bit of context, 17% of the year has travelled past, and considering we had COVID restrictions on the back half of August, those numbers are doing really well. In terms of contract service levels, we've got no issues there. Everything's tracking ahead of our targets. Just going on to page 46, just wanted to pull out a key point there. Well, there's a couple of key points, but the regulatory, we've all seen this around high house growth and consenting, and I just thought it was really useful just to reiterate that point there and make sure that that's being seen, how far ahead we are in terms of the demand for consents from other councils. So if we compare ourselves to Christchurch and Auckland, we are considerably ahead on a new dwelling per 1,000 people measure. Facilities, just the one thing I want to draw your attention to here is the hard blue line, which is the community centres, which includes Selwyn Sports Centre. And you can see from the July number how far ahead that was of last year, which reflects the impact that the Selwyn Sports Centre is having on our attendance numbers. And then we flip across to August and we can see the drop away there, which occurred due to COVID and took us back still ahead, just marginally, of where we were last year. So Selwyn Sports is having a big impact. Moving on to the next page, really it's a surplus and deficit page before depreciation, amortisation and tax. The reason why we do it before those matters, they're generally accounting adjustments and not really impacting how we're performing in the period. Why we've taken a bit more depth here is just to give you a bit more of an insight into where the drivers are for variances. Rates, as you would expect, is on target at this point in time, albeit slightly ahead, and I suspect we'll see that grow as, especially in the targeted area, as we see population growth. The subsidies and grants is where we've got the flood funding coming in from NZTA. And fees and charges, of course, is the increased revenue that we're receiving through the compliance activity that Tim Sim takes on around ensuring building consents and resource consents. On the other side, especially in the consulting and professional fees piece, that's the offset or partial offset of some of those costs that the regulatory team are bringing in around building consents, where we're outsourcing activity and there's an additional cost. To date, to the end of August, we've incurred 3.5 million of costs relating to the flood event. A portion of these, or around, it will be around about half of that, will be recovered through NZTA subsidies. Moving forward to the next page, I won't dwell upon this too much, but what this has taken is our significant activity areas, their surplus or deficit. So you can just see the areas of the business of the areas of the organisation where we've got pluses and minuses there. Transportation, we've covered off what that is around the flooding. The community services area ahead of target. It includes the I-zone area, and there's been a sale there of a lot, which brought in 0.35 million. And then in the wastewater space, that's running ahead of plan there, and that's largely to do with development contributions. The internal council services piece, it's picked up the dividend contributions and development contributions piece coming in Moving on to the next page, you'll be familiar with that report. That's our normal funding impact statement. And of course, that's looking at our sources of funds and then where those funds will go. I won't dwell on anything there. Capital expenditure. This is really looking at it by activity areas of what we're spending in a capital sense and across the type of capital, whether it's growth, level of service or renewals. We are tracking at 5% year to date of spend, and noting before that we're about 17% through the year. So that's quite low, but not unexpected given the planning cycles that we typically see, where the first couple of months of the year is focused on planning for the year and the activity around spend ramps up. Now, I mentioned before about variances. It's a tough one to pick here, which way you want to be, green or red. Where we're green, we're saying we've overspent, which is a bit of an odd thing, but what it's saying is we're meeting timetable around our spend. So it's a bit of a difficult one. Where we're underspent, we're saying we haven't been delivering the spend that we should be expecting. So we'll just have to be mindful of those shadings and colourings around variances because they can differ from time to time. Balance sheet analysis, we don't put in a full balance sheet, and that's just due to the fact that some of the accounts in the balance sheet are not regularly updated, such as depreciation on fixed assets, which occur more as an annual adjustment. But this report is going to include the key items of the balance sheet. Our balance sheet doesn't move around a hell of a lot. It's the current assets and liabilities are the main movements. We can see in there that cash has come back a little bit on July. You'd expect that. Our main lumps of cash that come in are during the quarterly rate payments, and 15th of September was the next rates payment piece. And what we have seen on that, just to provide a little bit of an update, is an uptick in direct debit payments, which is probably reflecting the fact that cheques are no longer accepted by banks. And I would like to make a bit of a push further on increasing that direct debit level. It's the most effective way for us to collect in rates and the cheapest. Not too much else to discuss there on those current assets, current liabilities. Seeing those trade payables come down, which you'd expect from a year-end position. They're typically quite high because everyone gets their billing in for the end of their financial year. Debt positions unchanged on the June balance, or last year, we're at 60 million. There'll be further analysis on that next report when we get into the next month when we get into the Treasury report, which comes out quarterly. But we are undertaking some activity to look at refinancing some debt, which comes due early 2022, and we'll put a program in place to do that. The investment side of it, really just to note what those are there. As you'd expect, there's no movement in that in the period other than a roll-off of some lease assets. Cash forecast, this is really reflecting the budgeted position in the LTP. We're monitoring that actively. Expect there will be a little bit of debt pulled in the latter half of this financial year, probably not quite where that graph's showing, but the latter part, and we'll be just keeping a very, very close eye on that. Heading across the page to the performance metrics, this will be populated out further as we get processes in place for collecting all of this data. So as you'll be well aware, some of these measures that we have in the LTP are annually measured through surveys, etc. I don't intend to be reflecting those in this report unless there's been a measure occurred. Really, a focus on this needs to be on anything that is sitting in the amber or red space. Those that are on this page that are in that position are largely COVID impact, where we've had people coming into community centres which have been unable to do so, fitness program delivery, and participation in library events. Across the page, we know full well around the resource consent and building consent aspects, or more so on the building consent aspects, and the heavy focus that we have on ensuring that we manage that as well as can be. The final one there around transport, we have no, got the year-to-date stats in there. I do want to put in where we were last year for the annual position, just so we do have a reference point. But I'd be very reluctant to ever have this out of an amber state. I think any fatality, certainly not acceptable, or any serious harm incidents on the roads. So I'd prefer to have that one as an amber measure all the time. So I'll leave it there and take questions.
Thank you, Kelvin. Murray.
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin. This is, I think, a lot easier to absorb. That said, not coming from an accounting background, it does take a while to absorb it, but getting there, and I appreciate the effort that's gone into it, because it is infinitely more readable and more understandable. And I think, as has been stated previously, we've got these things in our archive, so we can go back and look at previous months and do a comparison. I guess the crucial thing is not to have a knee-jerk reaction at about a figure that in 1 month goes, as you've said, slightly one way, and to look at it over a trend in a period of time. A couple of questions, really, and this is a general question. Perhaps David may be able to answer. The accreditation for building consent, must be coming very, very soon due. And just mindful, there was an item on TV last night in respect to Christchurch not meeting timeframes, and I look at the numbers of consents we're issuing compared to them, we're obviously under even more pressure. And the other side of things, Kelvin, is what is it that keeps you awake at night out of all these figures?
So while Kelvin's answering that question, Murray, the building accreditation starts in the second week of October. We are mindful of the position. It's not a unique Selwyn position. It's basically nationwide at the moment. The whole sector's tapped out in terms of resources. The reassurance that we can give is that the numbers are trending in the right direction, as Kelvin has alluded to previously. Secondly, the number of consents that we are issuing month on month continues to increase. And the third thing, and this is the forgotten number, is that the number of site inspections has significantly increased as well. So, yeah, not the position we want to be, but certainly improving. And it was really tipped on its ear by that huge number of consents we received in the month of March of this year. And we're struggling to recover from that. Kelvin.
Yeah. Thanks, David. It's not a criticism, because we all know what the issues are, and we also know that as a council, as management team, you've been active in trying to recruit and to put programs in place. I guess what I'm really saying is as much as anything is a public message to say, well, we're doing the absolute best to turn these things around, and I would hope that the auditors for our accreditation will see this as a national trend. And specifically for Selwyn and Canterbury, Waitaha really, is that we've got even more pressure upon us than perhaps some other regions. So yeah, thank you.
Just to add one further thing to the consenting piece, not in these, but I will include it in the future, is the average number of days to process a consent. So while we're not hitting the 20-day target, our days of processing are significantly lower than what we're seeing in Christchurch, which is a positive. So we're not meeting the target, which is not great, but we are getting them done in a reasonable time. In terms of the other question, Murray, around what keeps me awake at night, other than what I said earlier around cyber security, it's really the capital program, making sure that we're staying on top of that. It's those elements are the ones that can get out of control reasonably rapidly, and having an understanding of what our cash requirements are so that we can plan well and ahead and get the most effective borrowings that we can.
Thank you. Nicole.
Thanks for the report, Kelvin. It's much easier to read. I concur with Murray on that, and I'm glad you explained about the red and green for the CapEx one, because that actually confused me. I couldn't work out what was going on with that, sorry, I don't have a question, but just my last comment. I'm pleased to see your approach with the road safety, with keeping the amber. I mean, that's totally in line with what the government's pushing, the Vision Zero, which obviously we as a council are doing as well, because no one dying on or getting seriously hurt on the road, none of us want that. And that's the vision going forward, that we have 0 fatalities and serious injuries on our roads. So thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Shane?
Yep. Kia ora, Calvin. Just when I thought I was ahead of reading the current report, we get what we asked for. So thank you very much. And just understanding make it readable from the outset, the figure's obviously equivalent to $1 million at the top of the, yep. Thank you. Development contributions. Can you explain to me what development contributions are made up of in terms of the total cost? They're made up of a number of factors. So there's wastewater infrastructure and something else involved in that.
Yeah, sure, Shane. So we raise development contributions for the waters aspect of the organisation, roading and reserves. And how we set those is we're looking at over the projected 10-year period of the LTP, what we anticipate to be our capital cost of providing those services. We then look at what element of that cost is related to the growth in the district. And then we're taking that, I'm talking in very simple terms here. Yes. And then let's divide it over that growth, or the number of units of growth we're going to have over that period, to determine a rate that we'll charge out.
Understanding that we've been through a process of re-evaluating our DCs at some point, and actually Councillor Miller raised it during the discussions earlier, around actually when that comes up for review, and given the extraordinary amount of growth that our district is going through at the moment, it's obviously very unattractive. Our DCs are quite at a level that are very attractive to the developers. When do we see that being re-evaluated again, the cost of that? And I'm just particularly, I guess, asking that question in light of the possible reforms and the increased pressure on infrastructure as these houses go up.
Yeah, sure, Shane. So we'll readjust that again at the point in time we do another annual plan. So they were reset during the long-term planning process. So we reviewed the policy, and within reviewing policy, we look at those forecast positions of both growth levels and the level of costs required to support that growth.
Currently, our lending limit's maxed out.
No.
Oh, sorry, I'm reading that wrong then. My apologies. So we still have headroom in our lending limit?
Significant, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned the year-to-date capital spend is at 5%. Are we confident that over the next period of time that we'll be able to fulfil that CapEx budget?
That is, we've historically not delivered what we've said. Our eyes are sometimes filled larger than our belly, but we've improved our planning process, I think, significantly over the last period, around being focused on what we can deliver. And historically, there's been a tendency, if it's a multi-year project, to put the entire funding into that first year. So we're sort of fooling ourselves, and that's what the cost is going to be in the year. So we're getting to a point where we're now spreading it across the periods we think it's going to occur, which is improving that. But Shane, and to your point, this year will be a better chance than any year, because we have some significant items in there which we know are going to be delivered, such as the Darfield Pines pipeline, and we've got some big builds which are coming to the conclusion.
Okay, and just lastly, you're comfortable with the reimbursement pertaining to the operating costs, point B, comfortable with the reimbursement for Makakota here will significantly reduce that overrun there?
It'll reduce, and it's in line with their legislated approach to recovering, to reimbursing those sort of costs for natural events.
Thank you.
No other questions? I don't think so. My comments here, great report. It's very crisp, very easy to read. I especially like the sort of balance sheet presentation and investment. It kind of moves through the accounts, as I say, with ease. So well done to you and your team for making that significant improvement in the quality of reporting. So that's great. I had a couple of questions. The first one's probably a bit granular, but it was just for my understanding. I think it was on page 49 with regards to the I-zone variation, sort of reduction of servicing staff. So I think it was 100K. So just wanted to understand, was that a one FTE that was, I don't know, looking after that building, or what their role around that was?
I'll just answer that one quickly. That's really the community services and facilities space overall, as opposed to I-zone in itself. So,
okay.
And I think there's a comment somewhere else in the report around our FTE numbers are lower than budget, which you expect, because we set a budget for the year and then we fill the roles from 1 July.
Right, for sure. And I guess the other big thing, which you've already kind of alluded to, but it's just our capital expenditure. And I guess as you said, how do you portray that in the report without misleading the reader? Because, in most cases, overspend is red, but in this case, when we're trying to deliver capital projects for our ratepayers, underspend is red. So I guess how we make sure we're presenting the right message. And also we're very new, well, not that new, but new into the financial year. And yes, we had COVID at the beginning, so we've got that as a very valid reason for underspend and under delivery of capital projects. But as we move through the financial year, it'd be good to get a regular update on whether we are going to be able to, escalate any programs of work to try and do catch up, or whether we will, this time next year, there will be that significant undelivery because of those 2-3 months that were hit now. So maybe not next meeting, but maybe every quarter we could just get an update on whether we have been able to play catch up, I guess, in very simple terms.
Yeah, they're good points, and looking at it as a whole is difficult. Looking at individual projects makes variances more meaningful, because you will have situations of overspend which are negative, but underspend which is also negative for a project. And I should have mentioned that the major capital projects report, which follows, really allows a bit more granular detail to those big projects.
Great. If there's no other questions, can I have a mover for Calvin's report, please? Bob, thank you. And a seconder. Nicole, thank you. And all those in favour? Thank you. That moves us on to my favourite topic, major projects report.
Back to me.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll quickly get into the Ralston Town Centre piece on page 58, the report. So we presented this in a similar fashion last month, and looking at the components within the wider program. What we've included in this month, just to create a little bit more transparency around the funding, is we've taken the budget for each component and broken that down into its funding sources. So if we look at the example of the Tiara tier, predominantly the funding for that comes through the library rate, and we've got some additional funding through some grants and the balance which is sitting in the library account, commencement of the project, which we moved into this, the operating budget, and we took some funds out of the I-zone sales to fund that. Then if we look to the bluish grey, what we call it, duck egg blue piece, that's the forecast as it currently stands. Just on Tiara tier, the next column there says complete. It's not. That's just the title should have been on the one below, which is around some car parking, and in progress there. We see that we've got a potential overspend occurring here, and then on the far right is where that overspent will come from to be covered, and in this case here it would be the library rate. There are, when you get a little bit more granular in this, you can see that there's some pluses or minuses where overspend and underspend. And there's interesting there that the public area, which is forecasting an overspend, compared with the road access and servicing being under, and you get a general rate offset between the two. So it just allows a bit more granularity in how we look at things. The next page is splitting out those key areas within the program for stage 2 and 3, and looking at the risks. The risks are reasonably similar because of the state we're at, and of course at the moment the COVID piece is a high risk for us, really more the uncertainty. So we're getting back to a normal work rhythm on those sites under level 2, but that risk is always at mind. The other key thing here is potential for increasing costs and supply chain issues, which are continuing to emerge and become a factor. The tier project page, we're tracking there with an overrun of around about 7% on forecast. We've taken a conservative position on this regarding where we believe this will land. So we're always targeting to come in a little bit closer. Timing on this is still a little bit uncertain given the delays we've faced through COVID and as I was saying earlier, the supply chain issues. And any shortfall in funding here will come from the targeted library rate. Selwyn Aquatic Centre, major piece here of changes, extension of time. We're sort of looking for the project now to be completed December, January. I've put an estimate of January at the top just to be a little bit more conservative. Cost overrun on this is sitting around about 6%. And that's largely a factor of the variations that have come in around maintenance and a little bit on time. Health Hub, all tracking well here, just tenancy piece following on here and looking to put GPs in place. The building is signage going up, etc., as Douglas presented at the last council meeting. I'll look at these next two roundabouts together. They're very similar in their financial position. There's been some extension of times, which has created some additional cost around professional fees, project management, etc. And they're generally both reporting, well, they are both reporting a potential overspend here. Funding of that will come through general rates where we fund their roading from, well, a portion of it. And the final page there is around the projects which will be reported in the future. Darfield Pipeline will be the one that will come in next, which is progressing. I'll take questions.
Madam Chair, I wonder if I can just jump in on a procedural matter before we go to questions. It's council policy that if a meeting goes beyond a 2-hour stretch, we just take a resolution to allow that to happen, and I think it's prudent that we do rather than break this at the 2-hour mark. So if we could just have a mover and a seconder to go beyond. So I'm looking at Murray and Bob as moving and seconding extended. Thank you, Madam Chair.
David? Questions for the major projects report? Yes. Deborah?
Thank you. Reading the major projects report, when you look at them, and I'll sort of break them down from just a basic, we're looking at Tiara Aotea being funded from the library rate. We know that it's going to cost $4 per ratepayer per $1 million. And what we equate to is an overspend of already 1.66 mil, which equates to roughly $6 per ratepayer. We've got the Selwyn Aquatic Sports Centre. We're looking at an additional $5 per property over 10 years. at $85 million, $850K expenditure. Then we've got the town centre master plan, and that is funded by the ratepayers via debt, targeted rates and general rates. We're looking at a $1.52 million overspend, and the percentage of rates is going to be impacted by that. Then we have both the Shands Blake's Road roundabout, which is roughly a $1 million plus. I think it's about 250,000 K for the other, and that has to be funded out of general rates. We know that basically we've got expenditure due to COVID with regards to time constraints. We've also got building constraints. My question is around how are we actually tracking against our 10-year plan with managing our rates increases? Because these all impact on our 10-year plan, on our rates. Okay, we do have the buffering, I guess, of growth that may be, have we calculated the growth factor in our long-term plan to offset these increases, or have we included it? It's all going to come back and impact on the ratepayer through those various budgets, and I just want to know or understand what is going to be the total on a person's rates bill.
Given we're 2 months into 10-year plan, it's pretty early to make a call on long-term impacts. But what I'd say is that we've got, yes, we've got some challenges here, which we had challenges when we were going into this year on these projects with COVID. We're not seeing others which will potentially be reprioritised or come in at a cheaper cost, which would offset some of this. Looking over those 10 years, we just need to make a projection and have a review of this come annual planning time.
Sam, question?
Yeah, thank you. And I had a similar sort of thought to Deborah around the impact of rates, but particularly for the two projects, for our library and our aquatic centre rate, to be able to absorb this, and what it might mean for other projects that sit there, because I guess we've got two options. There's always there's a rate increase option, and then there's delay projects that currently sit within plan. So I guess thinking that those are some discussions that we're going to need to have next time we get to a long-term plan or an annual plan, which hoping that we don't have an annual plan next year as such. That will need some further discussion as we head towards Christmas. But the roading projects are mostly funded externally anyway. Only 12.5% and 25% in there are ours. So it's those other targeted rates, I suppose, where I can see some pressure coming, and just wondering where that's going to land. I guess, like you say, Calvin, we're so early into the LTP at the moment, and we don't know. Growth can take care of some of these things, but we've also programmed growth into our LTP, so that doesn't just fix it. It needs to be over and above what's currently scheduled. So thank you for the report, Joe. I think it's really clear, and it's nice to be able to see the tables that you've used to identify where that funding sits. It's not only clear for us, but it's helpful for the community if they were to look at these reports to understand where that sits.
Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, just reiterating what Sam said, thanks for a great report, and especially the breakdown of the funding, because that's living over this side of the highway, that's always a contention of where the money's coming from. So to see that breakdown is really good to be able to explain to people. Thanks.
Bob, Douglas, did you want to
just want to
comment?
Yes, I'd just like to add to Calvin's comments. Te Aratia is certainly the project that's causing us, one, as we work through the budgets and how that will be funded. The Aquatic Centre, we have absorbed a number of those maintenance issues into the rating scenarios that are already in place. So those impacts won't have quite the rate movement. It just puts into perspective what they are. And I suppose the key ones about stage 2 and stage 3 car parking and roads, where right at the start of those projects, we have contingency allowances. And so we're, as Kelvin said, we're taking the most conservative, i.e. most likely, or the worst case scenario. But it's fair to say those projects are a lot easier to manage in terms of variances than a build like Te Aratia and SAC, which have had some challenges. And my final comment is that the town square projects, we have not started those yet, but we have, as many will remember, we've put in the arbor structures. And so there are items that we will work through whether we fund those or do those anyway. So again, taking a very conservative picture as we should, but we will work through with the council over the next few months as to what expenditures we do incur.
Thanks, Douglas. David, any comment to add?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things to add to the response to Deborah's question. The first one is, when you're looking at rating impact, you also go and test your growth assumptions. We know that we're experiencing significantly greater growth than we had expected, and obviously that will offset the cost. The other one, which I've alluded to in the investment report, which we'll be looking at in a forthcoming briefing session, is a review of our revenue and financing policy, just to make sure that we've got the public good, private good mix right. Often we just leave, we put it in place, we set it, and then the amount of cross potentially needs to, so that will also be built through that review, along with the impact of these new.
Thanks, David. Shane, question?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, David. You beat me to the punch there. Beautifully surmised by Councillor Hassan, the increased pressure on our ratepayers to cover some of these shortfalls. I think as we look towards the discussion with the investment policy, our investment strategy moving forward, the opportunity to diversify council's income will play a vital role in that moving forward. So thanks, David.
Thanks, Shane. My commentary the report has probably commentary that I've said before. I'm still not comfortable with how contingency is articulated in the report, obviously with relation to Te Aratia mainly and the Selwyn Aquatic Centre. I would just ask, on the front page where we have the budget, obviously, which is our baseline budget, and then we have a current estimate to complete number. Again, the maths doesn't work from a, when we break the contingency down to, we've got contingency or variation, cost escalation relating to the shell. We've got cost escalation or variation relating to the fit out. And then we've got cost escalation, variation relating to consultancy. But it's all cost escalation, it's all variation. So even if you break it down into little buckets, I just think the wording is a little bit misleading, going, oh, we've only got this variation to here, so, that's not too bad. But actually, accumulatively, it's actually, when we talk about that greater percentage, it's actually quite a big number. Well, it's getting pretty close to a big number. So, and maybe Kelvin might be able to answer this, but maybe it's going to be more informative to make sure that baseline budget number is our baseline number, so the 22.69 with regards to Te Aratia. And then the estimated cost to completion should be plus all contingency, so shell, fit out and consultancy. What is that end number going to be? And I think, this will all come out when we do a post-investment review, but I think, going forward where we do have, and maybe this will be one of the recommendations that comes out, but I think once we get over, whether it's 4% or 5% of contingency, we need to have more than a bullet point on that variation, which says, added consultants fees needed, or I think as a governing group, we need a bit more than that. this will all be fleshed out in the PIR review. But I guess we just want to make sure that our projects going forward have the very, very best project discipline. So yeah, that's nothing that I haven't really said before. But I guess in summary, I'm looking forward to seeing the first of those PIR reviews come through.
Just to be clear on the contingency point, so what you're referring to as baseline budget for TRT, which is close to 23 million, that includes budgeted contingencies. The current estimate includes total cost to complete in our view.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
So maybe that's something to think about going forward, whether the baseline. Yeah, I guess it is the planned contingency at the project onset, isn't it?
And that would be the common or typical approach to recording the budget is the total approved by the council includes a contingency layer.
Includes, yeah.
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 You wouldn't be reporting the council's approved a budget, but also a contingency.
Without contingency, yeah. 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 But it is, I guess it's just that total contingency, isn't it? I mean, it's great to have the detail between shell, fit out and consulting, but it's also, I think, good or informative for governors to understand the total contingency, which is planned and unplanned, because it's all contingency. I guess it's part of the approved budget. But.
So move.
But frozen, I think. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you.
You can still hear me. You're all frozen. If there's nothing else, can I please have a mover for the major projects report?
Yep, so moved.
I might have. Thank you, Shane. And a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you. And all those in favour? Great, thank you. It must be almost running out of time because you're all slow in action with your going up, frozen slightly. Okay, I think that's the end of our public forum items.
That's correct. I'll move that we go under PX, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Yep, I'll do that.
Thank you. And all those in favour? Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I suggest a 5-minute break just to allow the IT guys to ensure that the public meeting is cleared?
Yep.
And
so it's 11:34:35 now, so 11:40.
Yep.
Kapai.